Hello, everybody. I'm Israel Roldan from Passionate People, and I'm today here with Minko Gechev. He's part of the Angular core team, and very happy to have you here. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah. Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Minko Gechev. I've been working on Angular for the past 2 years and a half as part of the team. Before that, I've been part of the Angular community and contributing with tools and pull requests and talks and content for about 8 years, I think. Since
Really seeing the evolution of the Angular community and code base from the inside. That's quite nice. We're here because you accepted our invitation to have a conversation about the future of Angular, and this is a topic that is really interesting to us and to all the audience here in JS World USA. Angular has been for a long time one of the frameworks that has been seen as not only one of the most composed frameworks in terms of all the offerings it gives us developers, but also one of the frameworks that comes with a lot of the things you need out of the box. So I wonder if you have maybe you can tell us a bit about how did you get into Angular? Like what made you choose for starting contributing, as you mentioned, to the Angular code base, being part of it, and let's take that as a basis to then explore the future.
yeah, I actually really like this direction. That's so I originally started using AngularJS in the past. That was maybe 2012, probably.
Okay.
I was trying to find the right framework for a product that I was working on for a startup. And this was supposed to be a very complicated, for the time, front-end application. So I was looking at the different options. Back then, I think they were primarily Backbone and Ember and Angular, maybe. And what really grabbed me with Angular is that it was coming with best engineering practices from the start, with specifically dependency injection is actually what I liked a lot. And I see this pattern keep occurring in different frameworks nowadays too, sometimes named differently, but still it is there because that's how you write testable and decoupled source code.
You are right. Many of these patterns are now making their way into the rest of the frameworks. And I have one question for you about that, but please tell us more about your own road.
Sure.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, and after that, the next step for me was I really want to see how Angular works. So I kept experimenting, like reading the source code. The dependency injection part was actually the easiest probably to understand back then. And it didn't have any hierarchy, so it was just a bunch of providers that you're assembling together. Kept digging into this also because I was interested in software engineering design patterns. So reading through the Angular source code helped me see many patterns and their usage in practice. And back then I was in college, so that was a really good academical exercise for me as well. Mm-hmm. And this continued with Angular. Now, Angular compared to AngularJS, I would say it has way more sophisticated implementation with way more interesting patterns inside of it and very interesting algorithms. So around AngularJS and Angular, I got really passionate about building tools for developers because I found them to be challenging and also providing value to people and inspiring others. Just by working on open source, you share this body of knowledge that anyone can take advantage of and can get inspired to build tools based on it. So yeah, that's how I got involved in the open source community and Angular, and I still enjoy this vibrant space. I've been still...
Well, and not only you got to a place where you can continue contributing to that, but you're also, as part of the core team, you actually have a big say, let's say, in how the framework is perceived as well, because of moments like these where you are telling us your story about Angular, your impressions, and that's quite nice to see. Thank you for sharing that story. You mentioned the dependency injection, the patterns in general. I think that when we think about Angular, the majority of people think about that level of code that you don't see that often in the front-end world, at least that you didn't see in the past. As you mentioned, many of these patterns are now kind of making their way into different frameworks. But when Angular.js and definitely when Angular 2, so Angular proper, started to show, like, many back-end engineers even started to really make sense of what Angular was trying to do in the front end. So is this a direction that you see being maintained, let's say, as part of the core team, as something that will be continue to be an elemental part of Angular's roadmap, this focus on structured patterns in the code base?
For sure, yeah. We're pushing towards best engineering practices across the board for our team in particular. For example, I was looking at the number of pull requests we had. We have 18,000 pull requests to the Angular monorepo by itself. We have merged the majority of them. And each one of these pull requests went through tens of thousands of tests, tests about like really the unit and the integration test inside of the framework repo, performance benchmarks. We have tests for the bundle size, tests for the public API. We also have about 25 to 2,800 applications in Google, and each one of them has hundreds of thousands of tests. Not hundreds of thousands of tests. In general, there are hundreds of thousands of tests.
Cumulative, yeah.
Yeah. And every commit that we sync from GitHub to Google, it needs to go through all these hundreds of thousands of test targets. So this large test coverage and this engineering practices that we have for the development of the framework, we're also trying to encourage them and enable them, some of them by default, as part of the development experience for people. So having opinionated platform for the opinions that we're sure about, because sometimes we want to be opinionated, but we want to have the right opinions. That's something that a friend of mine, like my former coworkers, Steven was he likes sharing. This is very important for us, and definitely Angular is going to be a framework where we're going to be encouraging the best engineering practices from the start, but introducing them gradually so that they are not introducing an overwhelming complexity for beginners.
I think that we would be remiss if we didn't mention the typical moment when you think about code changing, right? The Angular.js to Angular move. So that of course is a long way in the history of Angular, but it is typically seen as let's always keep in mind this backward compatibility, unlike what happened back then. Do you think that this process of being so careful and gradual about what you're doing has been an evolution of that mindset, let's say, that happened from Angular.js to Angular that we all remember? And I had my own Angular applications as well back then. Probably you did too, and it was a bit of developers nowadays are probably what we see in the Angular community that we talk to at Passion People. People are really excited about upgrading faster and just being, let's say, at the edge of what Angular is offering. Do you think that has an impact on how people perceive this increase in versions?
Sure, yeah. I can actually talk a lot about it, because when I was building the startup that I was involved in before I joined the Angular team, I had to pick a technology back then. That was the second product after the original one where I picked AngularJS. So for the second product, I picked it exactly in the moment when Angular was announced, but at the same time, AngularJS was still out there, and I didn't know what to do. And I knew that this is going to be a large effort. It is going to be huge migration costs. So in fact, I went with a different framework, and I think I did the right decision back then.
Well, for sure.
Yeah.
And so someone that is starting a project nowadays won't definitely face that part. But what can you tell us about would you start a project nowadays with Angular, looking forward to it?
Yeah, that's where I was going with that. So the team definitely didn't. It was a complicated decision. So I cannot really criticize the decision that the path that the team took. At the same time, the second part of it, like enabling engineering practice, is clearly very important for us, but also in a backward compatible way. So we have this concept of evergreenness right now in Angular, where we want to keep everyone constantly on the latest version, and to make it as easy as possible for them to be on this latest version. So we currently have an ng update command that has been keeping people up to date with minimal effort. So you should pretty much run ng updates, and from there, we're going to update your dependencies. We're going to perform code transformations if there is anything that we need to migrate automatically for you. And over the past couple of releases, the only breaking changes for people were just stricter type checking because we're updating the TypeScript compilers version. So yeah,
and that's always something that will break, right? Because if you are getting stricter at something, it also means your code base needs some adjustments. But I am always amazed when I talk to my colleagues that are using Angular like on a real large scale project, how happy they are with the upgrade process and how painless it has been for them. They are always in the edge of a version. So yeah, I really recognize what you mentioned, and I always admire how um, and this is maybe one thing I wanted to ask you. The whole ecosystem around Angular uh, has received a sort of injection of life in recent years. I definitely see more and more activity in the community around Angular. So um, you are a part of the Angular core team. Do you see the activities that the community are doing have also an influence on what gets added to the framework, maybe, and how this ecosystem is evolving in general?
yeah. Just to close the topic about the migration and updates. So what happened with AngularJS and Angular? I think it was definitely a tough decision, but at the same time, it helped us learn this lesson. So we could be at the place that we are today, where we're investing a lot in smooth update experience with ng update, making the framework keeping up with the web standards and also making it easy for developers to keep up with the latest version of the platform that we're building. And the community has been definitely like very supportive in variety of different ways. I saw in 2020, the only two, it was tough here for everyone with the global pandemic. We released Ivy, which was kind of the highlight of my year there. That was the only positive thing, I guess, in 2020. And also, we noticed significant growth after that. So the weekly NPM downloads at the beginning of the year were about 1.4 million downloads. And around the end of the year, they were 2.6 million downloads.
That's quite a growth curve there.
Yeah.
Is this because Ivy is well? I remember from we had a member of the core team last year explaining Ivy during Angular NL. Um, the speed, right? That is really the most important part of it. Do you think that has brought a lot of people like injected this interest in Angular, like Ivy as the main feature of it?
Ivy could be one of them. I also think that our investment in best practices and
Yeah.
smooth updates curve, and also smooth update process, and also ensuring that Angular follows best engineering standards, and also the Google's investment in Angular. These are all key factors. And seeing this growth in the community has definitely made me excited. And I can see this also being reflected in the feedback that we have been getting from people. So in Angular, we have developer relations team. That's the team that I'm involved in. And large portion of the time that we're spending is just talking to people and trying to figure out what is the right direction the framework should be heading to based on the people's feedback and based on the values that we have in our team. And we have been getting feedback in a variety of different ways. If you look at GitHub, for example, all these pull requests, these 18,000 pull requests, not all of them are from the team, clearly. We don't have the bandwidth to open that many. So we have been getting a lot of community contributions. We have been getting very strong signals about everything from very technical features to the general direction that Angular has been heading in social media, on GitHub, on different conferences, which were like recently mostly online. So the community is definitely what makes like Angular that special, at least for me.
That is really, and well, it means a lot that you that are part of the developer relations team that interact with the community in this way and receive that love, that sometimes the issues, right? Sometimes the complaints of us. You see the participation of the community, and that's a mark of a community that is vibrant and that has really shined. I'm really always really surprised to see not only the newest features that Angular is using, but also how quickly the community is to embrace them. And maybe if we can talk about the features that maybe that are right now in progress in the roadmap a bit. I think that one really interesting thing happening around the web, of course, last year was also the release of Webpack 5 and then Module Federation. This is, I think, one, especially in large-scale applications that tend to use Angular as the basis for as a framework. It is one of the features that may be most interesting to them, especially in the sharing code kind of sense, in the maybe micro frontends architecture. Is this something that it's coming down the line as a native thing? I know that there are a couple of adapters to provide support for it. Like what's in the roadmap there? Can you give us a little teaser about it?
I see two main directions that we are heading towards. One of them is continue providing ergonomic tooling for developers and enabling best practices. I would say here, module federation or micro front ends, to put a more general concept, fits really well here. And we're also looking a lot into making sure that Angular scales web with core web vitals. So we provide good performance metrics for applications, especially for customer, like public-facing applications. On the module federation side of things, there are different approaches right now for micro frontends, and one of the key projects that we prioritized is to investigate to see what are the best practices. Micro frontends could be implemented with module federation, for example. That's one of the options that we have been looking very actively into. But inside of Google, for example, we have an entirely different build system and entirely different set of practices. So we want to evaluate what is happening in there too, see how this relates to module federation, and define the steps to move forward. So yeah, this is something that we're very actively looking at right now. And we're going to do something about it for sure, because we see the high demand, but we want to make sure that we are confident in the decision and the best practices that we define to move forward with.
Sounds really in line with it. You were just talking about the gradualness of adjusting new features and then taking steps that will be future-proof. It makes total sense. I wonder, so there is this, in the modern web, like Angular defines itself as the framework for modern web development. Next to things like Model Web Federation, there's also things like, what Angular Universal has been doing a bit more of server-side rendering, server-side pre-rendering applications, and meta frameworks like projects like Scully. What can you tell us a bit about what you see, let's say, from projects outside the Angular ecosystem? Are they also, in a way, having an influence, let's say, in what the internal roadmap of Angular looks like?
Yeah. This is for sure. We want to provide good extensibility APIs, but at the same time, this is an interesting trade-off. Ideally, we would want to make Angular pluggable so people can plug into any point of the Angular's application lifecycle or the compiler's lifecycle. That's ideal, but at the same time, this would open a huge API surface. We're going to have a large we need to maintain this clearly, and if we change it in a way that we're going to break people, many applications are going to suffer. So we're trying to figure out the right balance between extensibility and also opinionation there. And definitely there are projects around specifically defining, let's say, rendering instructions and figuring out how we can make them public, or different ways of extending the lifecycle hooks.
So that Angular offers like a unified way to plug into, so that these other projects could consume that. That's what you mean?
Yes, and we're trying to find the right balance around that.
That would be quite a nice improvement. I wonder, is there inside the team, do you know, is there a clear direction in the dealing with removing legacy? Because adding newer features, it's always one very exciting part of product development, but one somewhat painful part is the opposite of that, which is, when do we cut, right, the certain features that probably are no longer needed for the wider use base? So can you give us a bit more insight maybe on how that process works inside?
Sure, yeah. That's one of the reasons why we have this like line on the Angular IO that Angular is the framework for the modern web developer, because we want to keep up with the evolution of the web. ng update is the way that the interface that we're providing for developers to make sure they're using the latest features of the web platform through Angular. But at the same time, there are a bunch of other processes that are happening in the team to help us make decisions and to help us remove legacy code or make particular deprecations for features that are no longer relevant. So a couple of things that we did recently in the space was to deprecate support for IE11, which is the last non-evergreen browser that doesn't automatically receive updates. This is going to allow us to take some new
major steps forward. Yeah.
It is going to allow us to move forward with using web platform features that we previously couldn't because we need to support IE11. Also, dropping our previous rendering engine, view engine. This is a really large step because it had some public APIs which are no longer relevant with Ivy. So we're looking into how we can transition the ecosystem and remove this legacy code so that we don't have to maintain it and we can make this framework generally simpler and faster. And this has been one of the major efforts that actually we have been looking into, because changing the foundation of the framework without breaking anyone, this wouldn't have been possible if we didn't have these hundreds of thousands of tests inside of Google to verify backward compatibility.
I can't imagine, like, adding a small feature needs to make sure that it's passing all of these set of tests. And when we think about open source, you think about all the thousands and thousands of hours that the community puts, but this is a completely different ballgame, because you are not only running your very comprehensive set of tests, but all the other applications you were just listing. So when you remove a feature like this, it is really tested in many, many platforms. That's quite impressive.
Yeah, it's... I'm happy we are able to be in this position. Clearly, at the same time, this puts a lot of not too exciting work, because imagine a test somewhere for an application, let's say Google Cloud, fails. We need to figure out how this application works, how we can build it even, because it's not a trivial application. It's like 2 million lines of code. In order to debug where the framework fails and why it fails, it's pretty like heavy amount of work, but at the same time, it pays off because we are keeping the platform stable for application developers.
This is really, really impressive work, and it really has paid off to see how the Angular team and the Angular community itself continues to be a very vibrant one. I wanted to ask you, maybe as one of the last questions in today's interview, and imagine a new maintainer of a new project that they are just starting with, maybe a project for Angular, the Angular ecosystem, or maybe a project for something else. What tips would you give them maybe to try and get off the ground this project in the open source community? I know that you personally are really interested in this idea of design patterns inside open source projects, right? The how the open source project itself works. Do you maybe have had some tips on how a community like this can get started? Because I think in our audience today we have some maintainers and some creators of projects as well that would really benefit from hearing it from someone like the Angular core team. Let's say, what are some of the lessons learned on that side of community development?
If you're just getting started with, I guess there are a couple of different aspects we can look at this through. One of them is how to start with open source, right? How to start building an open source project. And the community involvement, I guess, it comes after that. I would say it is to a large extent a chance. But in order to start with open source, I don't think people should be doing work. They should be just like enjoying the process. They should be finding something that they find exciting and like challenging, which they can grow with their passion. They can develop a product that they're really passionate about and move it forward, because otherwise, if it starts feeling like work, it's just not going to be sustainable. Imagine having 40-hour job a week, and after that having to work during the weekend on your open source project. It's not fun. But if you find an idea that you're passionate about, this is going to feel like relaxation in your spare time. And having this passion, this is going to eventually excite other people around that work who are going to start contributing their time, but at the same time, they'll be getting value out of it. They'll be learning new ideas, and they'll be feeling that they're part of something bigger that they can contribute to, that they're going to be making a difference in the world with it.
That's
So
that's a great set of tips. Thank you for that, because indeed you can see what you just described in the Angular community. I am just saying how these 18,000 pull requests, they come from this passionate set of people trying to make that product something better. So thank you for that answer. What is the next thing coming down the line for the Angular core team? Can you give us maybe some insights on what is something that you are excited that's going to come? Maybe I can follow up on our next interview.
Yeah, there are some short-term things that are coming down the line, and there are the larger efforts on making sure that Angular applications are fast to load, fast to render, like even faster to load and faster to render. I'll share something that is coming up in near future. It's we'll have pretty good presence on Google I/O, where we're going to share a couple of collaborations that we did with TensorFlow.js on building future-proof applications, combining machine learning and web development. And also, we're going to have some interesting announcements there. So I would recommend you to check out Google I/O. It's free this year. It's going to be exciting.
Wonderful. Well, looking forward to seeing these new releases there, and looking forward to also follow up on you maybe in a future edition of JS World USA. Thank you very much for being here with us today, Minko. I cannot thank you enough for making time for our wonderful online audience, and I will talk to you on our next edition. Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks for having me.